I work for a strange logistics company and I wish I never found out what we were shipping. It started with that strange email I received. It was some kind of job listing. It promised a straightforward payday, just logging and moving freight. It sounded good and was something I had experience in. So it seemed like an ideal match for the kind of work I needed. I had been recently laid off from my previous warehouse job, and the hours at the part-time gig I picked up afterward were abysmal. So when the peculiar offer came from a company called PT Shipping and Logistics, a name I'd never come across before, I didn't hesitate. The opportunity to get back to good-paying work was too appealing to pass up. I applied, and I didn't expect much to happen right away. But later that same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The subject line read, PT Warehouse Position, and my heart skipped a beat as I looked. The message was brief yet promising. They wanted to discuss the role further. The salary mentioned nearly made my jaw drop. It was nearly 3 times what I was making at my previous job. It felt almost unreal, but I tempered some of my initial excitement when I considered there must be some catch. Still, I decided to go in for the interview and learn more about the details behind such an enticing offer. The address led me to an industrial park on the edge of town. I pulled up to a nondescript grey building with only a small placard reading PT by the entrance. No windows, just concrete walls and a loading dock around the back. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just 3 other cars despite it being the middle of a workday. I arrived about 15 minutes early for my interview. As I approached the entrance, an odd feeling of dizziness struck me. Something in the air maybe. I hoped there were no fumes or anything leaking out somewhere. I looked back to the door and it buzzed open before I could even reach for the handle. "You must be the applicant," a voice called from inside. A tall, thin man in a grey jumpsuit stood just beyond the threshold. "Right on time. We appreciate punctuality." I introduced myself properly and extended my hand, but he simply turned and gestured for me to follow. The interior was nothing like I expected. Instead of the bustling warehouse I'd imagined, the space was eerily quiet. A few fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating rows of shipping containers and large wooden crates. No moving forklifts, no workers, just silence. "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly. "Shift change," the man replied without turning around. "You'll be working nights. Fewer distractions that way." We reached a small office at the end of a long corridor. Inside sat an older man behind a metal desk, his graying hair cropped short, his posture rigid even while seated. The nameplate on his desk read, PT Supervisor Matt Branson. "This the new guy?" he asked, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "Yes, sir, for the night shift position," the thin man replied before disappearing back down the hallway, leaving me alone with the man who I presumed would be my boss. "Sit," Matt said, finally glancing up. His eyes were hard, calculating, like he was assessing a piece of equipment rather than a person. I sat in the chair opposite him. I started to introduce myself. "Thank you for the opportunity. My name," but he cut me off. "I know your name, and I know you are thankful for a job. Here's how this works. I am going to get right to the point, lay out what is expected, and that will be your chance to either take it or leave it." I was surprised by the bluntness of my apparent interview, but I nodded my head and he continued. "You show up at 10 p.m. sharp. You load what needs loading. You unload what needs unloading. You don't ask questions about the cargo. You don't open anything, ever." I hesitated, flustered by his tone. "Okay, but what exactly will I be?" Handling specialized merchandise for high-end clients, he interrupted again. That's all you need to know. The pay is good because discretion is mandatory, got it? Sure thing, boss man, I replied with a slight smirk, trying to mask my unease. His expression didn't change. This isn't a joke, new guy. Break protocol and there will be consequences, understood? I nodded, swallowing hard. The smirk faded from my face. Crystal clear. Good. I will assume that is a yes then. Welcome aboard. Matt slid a form across the desk. Sign here, please. The rest of the paperwork can wait for later. You start tonight. I scanned the document quickly. It was an unusually lengthy confidentiality agreement. My pen hovered over the signature line as a voice in my head screamed that something wasn't right. The whole, don't ask questions about what we are shipping, screamed of something illegal. But then I thought about my empty bank account, my overdue rent, and I signed. Welcome to PT, Matt said, without enthusiasm. He stood up and gestured for me to follow him. I'll give you a quick tour. The warehouse was larger than it appeared from outside, with zones marked by colored tape on the concrete floor. Matt pointed to different areas with minimal explanation. Inbound, outbound, staging, processing. Each section contained identical black shipping containers with no markings except for small barcodes. What's in those? I asked, gesturing to a row of containers. Matt's eyes narrowed and I realized my mistake. Right, sorry, I mumbled apologetically. They really did take the confidentiality of the cargo seriously. As we walked toward the back, I noticed a large metal door with a keypad lock. Unlike the rest of the facility, this door had warning signs, authorized personnel only, and environmental controls in effect. And that area? I couldn't help asking. Matt paused, as if assessing what he should say. Storage, Matt said flatly. He squared his shoulders and turned to face me directly, his weathered face suddenly severe in the harsh fluorescent light. Listen closely, because I'm only going to say this once. There are a few strict rules here at PT. Not guidelines, not suggestions, rules. Break them and you're gone. No warnings, no second chances. I nodded, suddenly aware of how quiet the massive warehouse was. I still thought it was odd that no one else was around. Rule number 1, Matt raised a finger. Never, under any circumstances, open any of the boxes or shipping containers. I don't care if you hear noises coming from inside. I don't care if one starts leaking something. I don't care if the manifest says it contains gold bullion and the lock falls off in your hand. You do not open anything. If something is already open, you call me immediately. His eyes held mine, searching for any hint of defiance or misunderstanding. I nodded again, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. Rule number 2, he continued, raising another finger. All freight processing must be completed on schedule every night. The manifest will be on your workstation and everything listed must be moved, sorted, and prepared before end of shift. No exceptions. A muscle in his jaw twitched. If the work falls behind, breaks and lunches will be skipped. I've worked double shifts before, and I can assure you it's not pleasant. He walked a few paces, gesturing for me to follow. We passed by a row of strange equipment I couldn't identify, machines with dials and gauges that looked medical in nature, rather than industrial. Rule number 3. Maintain complete radio silence unless absolutely necessary. The equipment we use is sensitive to certain frequencies. Use the intercom system only if you urgently need to communicate with another worker. I glanced around, noticing for the first time the small black intercom boxes mounted at intervals along the walls. Rule number 4, Matt continued. his voice dropping slightly. Some areas of the warehouse are temperature controlled. The thermostats are preset. Do not adjust them for any reason, even if it feels unbearably cold or hot. The merchandise requires specific conditions. When I say cold, I mean cold. You might want to make sure you have a jacket or something warm. You're going to need it. We reached a metal door with a biometric scanner beside it. Matt placed his palm on the scanner and a green light flashed. "Rule number 5, he said, his tone becoming even more serious if that was possible. At exactly 5 a.m., an alarm will sound. When you hear it, no matter what you're doing, no matter how urgent the task seems, you will immediately proceed outside through the emergency exit doors. Everyone must exit the building during this time. It's the only mandatory break of your shift, and it lasts precisely 15 minutes, not 14, not 16. "What's that about?" I asked before I could stop myself. Matt's expression darkened. "That's the company performing system checks. Nothing for you to worry about." He stepped closer, his weathered face just inches from mine. "But understand this, if you're still inside after that alarm, I can't guarantee your safety." The way he said it sent ice through my veins. Not a threat, but a genuine warning. Whatever it was must be legitimately dangerous. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling I was getting and nodded my head. "Got it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Outside at 5 a.m. Matt nodded once, seemingly satisfied with my response, and he continued. "Rule 6 concerns dealing with strangers or intruders on the premises. Should you detect anyone lingering here without proper authorization, you are to detain them if possible. If not, contact me immediately so I can alert our security lead. I know you might have reservations, so let me dispel them now. We are not engaging in any illegal activities here. Despite the peculiar hours and need for discretion, PT Shipping operates as a legitimate business. We own this building outright and possess all necessary business licenses. Our discretion protects our clientele, and Mr. Jaspen's work demands it, as does ours. As such, this is private property. Trespassing is strictly forbidden. Is that clear?" I nodded briskly, suppressing the torrent of questions swirling in my mind, realizing it was unwise to voice them under his intense glare. He interpreted my silence as understanding and continued. "Good. That is it. Keep to your job. Don't ask questions and get paid well. Now for your workstation." He led me to a small desk tucked between tall shelving units. A computer terminal, clipboard, and handheld scanner sat waiting. Next to them was a grey uniform with PT embroidered on the breast pocket. "You'll work alone most nights," Matt explained. "Occasionally there's another handler on shift, but don't count on the company." "Handler," I repeated. "Is that my job title?" Matt's jaw tightened. "Product handler. That's what you are." He checked his watch. "I've got to go. Your first shift starts at 10 p.m. Don't be late." As he turned to leave, I noticed something strange. A dark stain on the concrete floor near one of the shipping containers. It looked like someone had tried to clean it up, but hadn't quite managed to remove it completely. "One more thing," Matt called over his shoulder. "Stay away from the containers marked with red tags. Those are priority shipments for Mr. Jaspen himself. I will handle those, and if I am unavailable, leave them unless absolutely necessary to get them out on time." With that, he disappeared through a side door, leaving me alone in the cavernous space. The silence was absolute now, broken only by the distant hum of what sounded like industrial refrigeration units. I picked up the grey uniform and examined it. Standard work clothes, but the material felt oddly stiff, almost like it had been starched beyond reason. My shift didn't start for hours, so I decided to head back home and force myself to get some sleep. It was going to be a long first night, and I had to get used to becoming a night owl. I did not sleep much and got back to work a few minutes before 10 p.m. The place was unnerving at night. The outside was barely lit, and I almost tripped several times just walking from the parking lot to the main building. I stepped in and saw that at least it was brighter inside. I made it to my station, and I saw a new inventory log, and as I was reading it, I nearly dropped it to the ground. When someone tapped me on the shoulder and startled me, I spun around and saw a woman, mid-40s maybe, with prematurely grey hair pulled back in a severe bun that looked painfully tight. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, and she regarded me with a clinical detachment that made me feel like a specimen under glass. "You must be the new guy," she said flatly, with no introduction. She wore a dark jumpsuit and heavy steel-toed boots that looked like they could crush concrete. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to calm my racing pulse. "And you are," she sighed, as if my simple question had already exhausted her patience. "Jean, inventory lead." She glanced at my uniform, which I'd changed into before arriving. "At least you dress properly." The last guy showed up in sneakers. Didn't last a week. The way she said it made me wonder what had happened to him, but I decided not to ask. "Matt gave you the rules." She didn't wait for my confirmation before continuing. "Good. Follow them to the letter. I've been here 7 years. There's a reason for that." Jean moved with an efficiency of motion that spoke of someone who never wasted energy. She pulled a tablet from a nearby shelf and tapped the screen a few times. "First truck is due soon," she said, checking her watch. "Your job is to help me unload, check the manifests, and get everything sorted according to protocol." She handed me the tablet. "Tonight's a quiet one. Only 3 shipments. Not much to load up either. Pay attention, because you will be doing a lot of this by yourself in the near future, and also because I don't like repeating myself." I nodded my head and examined the manifest. Most entries were coded with alphanumeric sequences that meant nothing to me, but the quantities and timestamps were clear enough. "What are we shipping exactly?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Jean's eyes flicked to mine, then away. She sighed again, deeper this time. "What did Matt tell you about questions?" "Right, sorry. Look," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "I get it. You're new, you're curious. Natural human response." She leaned closer. "But trust me when I say curiosity is actively discouraged here, not just by management." Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, a buzzer sounded, indicating a truck had arrived at the loading dock. "That's our cue," Jean said, straightening up. "Follow me. Do exactly as I do. Nothing more, nothing less." We walked to the loading dock, where a large black semi had backed up to the platform. Unlike any delivery truck I'd seen before, this one had no company logo, no DOT numbers, nothing to identify it. Just pure matte black, even the license plates. The driver remained in the cab, engine idling. Jean approached the back of the truck and entered a code on a keypad. The rear doors swung open silently, revealing a cargo area that seemed impossibly dark, despite the loading dock's harsh lights. "Stand back," Jean instructed, positioning herself to the side of the opening. I did as told, watching as she pressed another button on the wall. A mechanical whirring filled the air, and a platform extended from the dock into the truck's interior. What happened next defied explanation. The darkness inside the truck seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from asphalt on a scorching day. Then, as if pushed by invisible hands, 3 large containers slid out onto the platform. They weren't standard shipping crates. These were sleek black boxes, about 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, with no visible handles or seams. Each bore only a barcode and a small digital display showing a temperature reading. 2 displayed a normal room temperature, but the third read 15 degrees. That one goes to cold storage immediately, Jean said, pointing to the frigid container. I'll handle it. You log the other 2. As she maneuvered the cold container onto a special cart, I approached the remaining boxes with the scanner in hand. The moment I got close, I felt a terrible ringing in my ears. Then an odd sort of buzzing, like a bee has flown down into my inner ear. I could have sworn I heard a faint, scratching sound as well. I froze, scanner hovering in mid-air. Problem? Jean called from several feet away, her voice sharp. I thought I heard. She was already frowning at me. Nothing, I quickly stated, shaking my head. Just getting used to the scanner. Jean's eyes narrowed slightly, lingering on me a moment too long. Scan them and move on. We're on a schedule. I ran the scanner over the barcodes, trying to ignore the odd buzzing near the box. The scanner beeped confirmation, and the tablet in my other hand automatically updated with the shipment details. Now what? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Now we move them to staging, Jean said, returning from cold storage. Zone B for these. Follow me. I helped her push the cart with the 2 remaining containers through the warehouse. The wheels squeaked slightly on the concrete floor, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. As we rolled them into place, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not the only ones there. Listen, Jean said abruptly, after we'd positioned the containers. She sighed, rubbing her temple with 2 fingers. I don't usually bother with the new people. Most don't last. But you seem... She paused, searching for the right word. Less stupid than some. So I'm going to give you some advice. She looked around, ensuring we were truly alone. When the 5 a.m. alarm sounds, be the first one out the door. Don't dawdle, don't finish just one more thing. And whatever you do, don't look back at the building. I swallowed hard. Why not? Because some things can't be unseen, she said flatly. And because I've outlasted 3 full crews by minding my own business and following protocol to the letter. You are here now. The pay is good. If you don't ask questions or get any ideas, you will be fine. Everyone else that has been let go has done something stupid. Keep your head down and your mouth shut, for your sake and everyone else's. The buzzing sound grew slightly louder. Jean didn't seem to notice, or was pretending not to. What's actually in these? I whispered, nodding toward the container. Jean's face hardened. You really don't listen, do you? But something in her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. She leaned in close. The proud tailor deals in specialized merchandise. That's all you need to know. The proud tailor? I thought this was PT shipping and PT. She cut me off. The initials. Figure it out. She tapped her temple with one finger. Mr. Jaspin expects his shipments to arrive in perfect condition. Our job is to ensure that happens, nothing more. Before I could ask who Mr. Jaspin was, the intercom crackled to life. Jean, report to receiving. The second shipment is arriving early. It was Matt's voice, sounding groggy, but no less irritable. Jean straightened immediately. Got it. She turned to me. Finish logging these two, then meet me at the receiving dock. Don't touch anything else." With that, she strode away, her boots making barely any sound on the concrete floor. I glanced at the manifest on the tablet. The description field for these containers simply read, "Display units, fragile, temp sensitive." My hand hovered over the container's surface. No locks were visible, just a seam around the middle where it presumably opened. The rules were clear: never open anything. Yet the curiosity in that moment was overwhelming. I started to get morbid ideas. What if this was some kind of human trafficking operation? The silhouette of the boxes was ghoulish. As I stared down at the box, my mind raced with more possibilities, and the desire to know grew stronger. Suddenly, the intercom crackled, breaking my morbid musings. "New guy, where are you? Second shipment's waiting." Matt's voice echoed through the warehouse, impatience evident. I quickly tapped a response into the container manifest, marking it as processed, and hurried toward receiving. Whatever was happening here, whatever was in those boxes, I needed more information before I did anything stupid. Jean's warning echoed in my mind. Curiosity was actively discouraged. Now I understood why. I arrived at the loading dock just as the next truck rumbled its way into the bay. This one appeared more typical than the first, its worn exterior a familiar sight. Most of the freight was neatly packed into standard-style shipping containers, their metal sides marked with destination labels and handling instructions. The sight of these ordinary items eased the tension I felt earlier. Jan quickly scanned through the manifest, her eyes darting from line to line. Meanwhile, I maneuvered our small yellow forklift to offload the unassuming cargo. It was a few more hours of moving boxes, and almost everything had been stowed away and logged properly. I was just finishing another trip when I heard a loud alarm sound. I noticed it was nearly 5 a.m., and I almost tripped over myself to run out of there. The loading bay lights pulsed in sync with the blaring siren, each flash amplifying the urgency in the air. I reached the door, breathless, just as Jean appeared at my side. Her pace was brisk, purposeful, as she kept her eyes locked on the exit, not sparing a single glance behind. We both pushed through the emergency exit door into the pre-dawn darkness. The cool morning air was nice, clearing the warehouse fog from my mind. Jean kept walking until she reached the edge of the parking lot, where she stopped and lit a cigarette with practiced motions. I followed, watching as a few other workers I hadn't seen during my shift emerged from different exits around the building. None of them looked at each other or at the building. All of them kept their eyes fixed on the ground or on distant points in the darkness. "You did good," Jean said as I approached, exhaling a cloud of smoke that hung in the still air. Most newbies have to be reminded about the 5 a.m. drill. "What's really happening in there?" I whispered, unable to help myself despite all the warnings. Jean took another long drag and sighed heavily. "System maintenance," she said flatly, but there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't believe her own words. "That's bullshit, and you know it," I whispered, making sure none of the other workers could hear us. She turned to me, her eyes hard in the dim light of the parking lot lamps. "Listen carefully. There are things that happen in this job that defy explanation. I've learned it's better for my sanity, safety, and continued employment to accept the official answers." A strange sound cut through the pre-dawn stillness, something between a mechanical whine and a muffled scream. It seemed to come from inside the building, but it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Organic yet mechanical, pained yet precise. I instinctively turned toward the sound. Jean's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Don't," she hissed, her fingers digging into my flesh. "Don't go back. Don't even look back at the building during maintenance." I forced my gaze away, focusing instead on the cigarette between Jean's fingers. The ember glowed orange in the darkness, hypnotic in its simplicity. "How long have you worked here?" I asked, trying to distract myself from the sounds that continued to emanate from the building. Sounds that seemed to be growing in intensity. 7 years, 2 months, 16 days, she replied without hesitation. Longest anyone's lasted besides Matt. "Who is Mr. Jaspin? You mentioned him earlier." Jean's expression flickered with something that might have been fear. "The owner of the Proud Tailor. He visits occasionally to inspect special shipments." She took a final drag of her cigarette before crushing it under her boot. "If you ever see a tall, thin man in an expensive suit, stay out of his way. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact unless he initiates it. He likes to chat, and if he likes chatting with you, well, you might get the wrong kind of attention." I considered what she said and wondered why someone who owned a tailoring store would need a shipping operation like this. For a second, I laughed at the idea of the secret things in the boxes being knockoff jeans or other cheap clothes that we were moving just to avoid customs and state taxes. Whatever was in those black boxes, though, sure didn't feel like clothes. Another sound pierced the air. This one a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. Several of the other workers winced visibly, clutching their ears. One man standing close to the door suddenly fell to his knees, his face contorted in a silent scream. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. A heavy silence fell over the parking lot, broken only by the distant call of an early bird and someone's ragged breathing. 1 minute left, Jean announced, checking her watch. "Everyone remembers where you were working. We aren't done yet." I stared at her, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Jean, what the hell is going on in there? Those sounds, they weren't machinery." She didn't answer, her eyes fixed on her watch. The other workers had formed a loose line near the doors, like actors waiting for their cue to return to stage. 30 seconds, Jean called out. I grabbed her arm. "I can't go back in there without knowing what—" 10 seconds, she interrupted, shaking off my grip and hissing back at me. "Get in line or they will notice." The implication was clear. I hurried to join the others just as a different alarm sounded. 3 short beeps that seemed to signal the all clear. The workers filed back inside through the same doors they'd exited, their movements mechanical, rehearsed. Jean waited for me at the entrance. "Back to your station," she instructed. "Act normal. Whatever you think you heard, forget it." I followed her inside, fighting every instinct that screamed for me to run. The warehouse appeared exactly as we'd left it. Containers neatly arranged, equipment powered down, paperwork stacked on desks. But something had changed. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. As I walked back to my station, I noticed something on the floor that hadn't been there before. A fine white powder, almost like plaster dust, trailing from the door marked authorized personnel only to the loading dock, and near one of the containers we'd processed earlier, a small dark stain that looked disturbingly like blood. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of activity. We loaded a small outgoing truck, and for some reason Jean had me log the shipment, but would not let me help load the boxes on board. By the time 7 a.m. rolled around, we were done, and our replacements had arrived. 2 stone-faced men who acknowledged us with nothing more than curt nods. I followed Jean to the employee break room, where she retrieved a worn leather bag from her locker. First night's always the hardest, she said, not unkindly. You did okay. Jean, I said, lowering my voice even though we were alone. I can't keep working here without some answers. Those containers and those sounds during the maintenance, something is seriously wrong with all this, isn't there? Stop, she cut me off sharply. Just stop right there. Jean's eyes darted to the security camera in the corner of the locker room. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength and pulled me closer. Not here, she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. Meet me at Denny's on Highway 16. 1 hour. With that, she shouldered her bag and walked out, leaving me standing alone in the sterile locker room. I stared at my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. Pale face, dark circles forming under my eyes. A haunted look I didn't recognize. Just what the hell had I gotten myself into? The drive to Denny's gave me time to think. Maybe too much time. Every scenario my mind conjured was worse than the last. Drug smuggling, organ harvesting, human trafficking. None of them quite fit what I suspected I saw, or at least thought I saw. Based on the hints and unnerving glimpses, I really did not know anything for sure about what was really going on at PT. Shipping, yet anything seemed plausible. Jean was already there when I arrived, tucked into a booth in the far corner, nursing a cup of coffee. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a faded sweatshirt, but the severe bun remained, pulling her features taut. You came, she said, as I slid into the seat across from her. Wasn't sure you would. Of course. What was it you wanted to tell me? I was sort of hoping that it might be a bit more about what the hell we are moving in that place, I replied, keeping my voice low despite the nearly empty restaurant. What I heard last night, what I saw. You didn't see anything, Jean interrupted, her eyes hard. That's the first thing you need to understand. If you're going to survive this job, you need to accept that some things cannot be explained, or rather, should not be explained. A waitress approached, but Jean waved her away with a practiced gesture. The woman retreated without a word, as if she recognized something in Jean that warned against interruption. I can't just pretend I didn't hear anything. I mean, come on, are we even safe? I asked, leaning forward. Something is wrong with those containers. Something was buzzing, maybe even scratching inside them. Then there were the screams during that so-called maintenance period. Jean's hand shot across the table, gripping my wrist with painful intensity. Her fingernails dug into my skin as she pulled me closer. Lower your voice, she hissed. Her eyes, I noticed for the first time, weren't just tired. They held a kind of haunted knowledge that made me falter. Yes, there were sounds. Yes, there were things in those containers that probably don't fit into your neat little understanding of the world. But knowing more won't help you. It will only make things worse. And no, strictly speaking, we are not what you would probably call safe. But the only way to guarantee you are not safe is to keep openly asking questions. She released my wrist, leaving small crescent marks where her nails had been. I rubbed the spot, watching as she took another sip of her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. I can't keep working there, I said finally. Whatever's happening, it's messed up. At this point, the whole thing seems like it is a front for something massively illegal. I don't know how much you aren't telling me, but maybe we could go to the police. With everything we suspect, someone would have to investigate. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped Jean's lips, drawing glances from the few other early morning patrons. She leaned back in the booth, suddenly looking almost defeated. You have no idea what you're dealing with, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The police? They already know, or at least certain people in the department do. Why do you think we operate so openly? Why do we have business licenses and tax ID numbers? This isn't some fly-by-night operation. PT has connections. What kind of connections could possibly allow them to? Powerful ones. Jean cut me off. Look, I've seen people like you before. Decent, moral people who think they can change things, who think they can expose what's happening and make it stop. She leaned forward again, her eyes locking with mine. Remember Jacob? The guy who had your job before you? I shook my head. Exactly. No one remembers Jacob. He decided to be a hero too. Took photos on his phone of one of the containers. Tried to open one when no one was looking. Her voice caught slightly. 2 days later, his apartment was empty. All his things were gone. Like he never existed. His mother filed a missing persons report. Nothing came of it. A cold weight settled in my stomach. You're saying they killed him? Jean's eyes darted around the restaurant before returning to mine. I'm saying he disappeared, just like Marissa before him, and David before her. People who ask too many questions don't last long at PT. I swallowed hard and considered her words. It was too much at that point, and I just resolved to get out. I told Jean my plan. Okay then, I will just quit. I don't like it, but if something dangerous or illegal is going on that could just disappear me, then I will just leave. I can even put in a 2 weeks notice, so they don't think it is because I suspect something. Jean laughed, a harsh and hollow sound. She looked at me like I was an unruly child. You think that they believe anyone could be so dense as to not suspect something, even after one night? So then what can I do? Why are you telling me this? Her eyes narrowed and she responded, because you need to know that you can't just quit now. You are in this, whether you like it or not. If you want to not disappear too, then just keep your head down, keep quiet, and do not rock the boat. The less you know, the less danger you're in. I have to go. You should get some sleep. And remember what I told you. I am off tomorrow. Try and keep safe while I'm gone. And take care. She threw some money on the table and walked out without another word, and I was left stunned and speechless. It sounded like I was stuck, and I still had no idea what I had gotten myself into. My anxiety was palpable, and I hardly got any sleep when I returned home. If what Jean said was true, then the place I had just gotten a job at was hiding a dark secret, and I could not uncover it or leave and run away. I was forced, for the time being, to continue working for the bizarre company, continue shifting those mysterious boxes without ever knowing what horrors they might contain. When it was time to go back, I hesitated and almost considered calling out and not going. But I did not want to attract any unwanted attention just then, so I summoned my courage and went back to PT. Shipping for my second day of work. I arrived a few minutes early, but no one else was there to greet me this time. I shuffled in and grabbed a new manifest from my workstation and the tablet. I saw the first shipment was scheduled to arrive in the next 10 minutes. Then I looked at the list on another page and realized that there were twice the amount of trucks that day than my first, and I had no apparent help, at least with what I would be doing. I thought briefly about the other people I saw leave the building yesterday at 5:00 a.m. Why did they have us sectioned off and not working together? It was another question I would have to set aside. I was going to be very busy and thought that maybe the distraction might be nice. The first truck backed up to the loading dock with a low rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor. I approached cautiously, remembering Jean's methodical movements from the night before. The keypad by the door blinked expectantly. I punched in the code I'd memorized and stepped back as the door swung open. Unlike last night's mysterious black containers, This truck held rows of ordinary-looking wooden crates. They were stacked neatly, secured with straps, each bearing standard shipping labels and barcodes. No strange temperatures, no odd buzzing, just regular freight. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe not every shipment contained whatever horrors Jean had alluded to. Maybe some days were just normal. The manifest indicated these were textile supplies for various retail locations across 3 states. Fabric bolts, perhaps. Sewing machines. Things a company called the Proud Tailor might legitimately ship. I worked efficiently, scanning each crate and moving it to its designated staging area. The forklift hummed beneath me, comfortingly mundane. For nearly an hour, I allowed myself to believe I was simply working a regular warehouse job, one that happened to pay extraordinarily well for night shifts. I thought I might be able to relax for a moment, but I heard the staticky voice of Matt through the intercom. "New guy, second shipment is ahead of schedule. It is a priority shipment. Get down to receiving Bay B, get a move on." I was not even done with the first load, and now the next one was already coming. I was starting to get stressed out that I was falling behind. I rushed to Bay B, maneuvering the forklift hastily through the narrow aisles. As I rounded the final corner, I caught sight of the back of a sleek black truck, similar to the first one I'd seen last night. My heart immediately began to race, knowing what might be inside. Just as I approached the loading dock, the forklift sputtered, the engine making a high-pitched whining sound I hadn't heard before. The control panel flickered, lights blinking erratically across the dashboard. I tried to slow down, but the machine lurched forward suddenly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, narrowly avoiding a stack of pallets. The forklift shuddered violently beneath me, the hydraulics screaming in protest. Then, without warning, the lift dropped, not smoothly as designed, but in a single catastrophic release. They slammed into the concrete floor with a deafening crash, sparks flying as metal scraped against concrete. I was thrown forward against the safety cage, my chest hitting the steering column hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. The forklift continued its chaotic movement, spinning in a half circle before the engine cut out completely, leaving me stranded in the middle of the bay. "What the hell are you doing?" Matt's voice boomed from somewhere behind me. I turned to see him storming across the warehouse floor, his face contorted with rage. "I didn't. The forklift just..." I stammered, still trying to catch my breath. Matt reached me in seconds, his weathered face inches from mine. "Get off, now." I scrambled down from the malfunctioning vehicle, my legs shaking. Matt circled the forklift, examining it with narrowed eyes. He ran his hand along the control panel, then knelt to inspect the dropped forks. "This equipment was checked yesterday," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then his gaze snapped back to my face, eyes cold and calculating. "Goddamn interference is worse than normal. Were you near any red-tagged containers earlier?" "No," I answered truthfully. "I've been unloading the unmarked textile shipment so far." Matt's jaw tightened as he glanced toward the black truck waiting at the bay. "Well, the timing of this is awful." He pulled a radio from his belt. "Jean, we need you at Bay B. Equipment failure." There was no response, just static. "Right," he sighed. "She's off today." The back doors of the black truck swung open on their own, revealing the now familiar darkness that seemed deeper than it should be. A soft, rhythmic thumping sound emerged from within, like something repeatedly striking the interior wall. Matt cursed under his breath. "Those need to be moved immediately, temperature sensitive." He turned to me. "You'll have to move them manually." "Manually?" I echoed, my voice cracking. "You mean carry them?" "The dollies are in the maintenance closet," Matt growled, pointing toward a narrow door across the warehouse. "Grab one, quick." I jogged to the closet, my mind racing. Manual handling meant direct contact with whatever those black containers held. The thought made my skin crawl, but I had little choice. Matt was watching my every move with increasing impatience. Inside the closet, I found several heavy-duty dollies designed for oversized freight. I selected the sturdiest looking one and wheeled it back to the bay where Matt stood, arms crossed, foot tapping rhythmically against the concrete. "Remember the protocol," he said as I approached the truck. "No unnecessary contact. Move them directly to the designated area." He glanced at his watch. "I need to make a call. Get this done before I return." As Matt disappeared through a side door, I faced the yawning darkness of the truck's interior alone. The thumping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that somehow felt worse. I steeled myself and rolled the dolly up the loading ramp. The first container slid forward as if pushed by unseen hands, just like the night before. Up close, without Jean's calming presence, the experience was infinitely more unsettling. The black surface seemed to absorb the light around it, and as I positioned the dolly beneath one end, I could have sworn the container shifted slightly, adjusting on its own to maintain balance. I carefully tipped the container back, distributing its considerable weight across the dolly's frame. It was heavier than I expected, at least 300 pounds. As I began to pull it down the ramp, a vibration traveled up through the handles into my arms, a subtle, rhythmic tremor like a heartbeat. The container slid off the truck with surprising ease, almost eager to be free of its confined space. I guided it across the warehouse floor toward the staging area Matt had indicated. With each step, the vibration grew more pronounced. When I reached the staging area, I carefully lowered the container to the ground. As it settled onto the concrete, a sound emerged from within, a kind of soft scraping, like fingernails dragging across the interior surface. I jumped back, nearly losing my grip on the dolly. The digital display on the container flickered, the temperature reading jumping from 10 degrees to 8 degrees C, then back again. The scraping sound intensified for a moment, then abruptly stopped. I stood frozen, staring at the black box. Whatever sounded like it was moving, scraping. The realization sent ice through my veins, but I couldn't afford to panic. There were still 2 more containers to move, and Matt would return soon. Forcing myself back to the truck, I repeated the process with the second container. This one was even heavier, and as I maneuvered it down the ramp, a thin sheen of condensation formed on its surface, immediately turning to frost in the warehouse air. The temperature display read, "Ideal, colder than the first." As I positioned it next to the other container, both boxes seemed to shudder simultaneously, as if acknowledging each other's presence. The hair on my arm stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by security cameras or by Matt, but by whatever was sealed inside these mysterious shipments. I returned for the third and final container, my nerves fraying with each step. This one looked different from the others, slightly larger, with a faint red glow emanating from its temperature display. As I approached, a wave of dizziness washed over me, accompanied by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The container slid forward, but unlike the others, it moved aggressively, nearly crushing me against the side of the truck. I stumbled backward, barely catching myself on the loading dock edge. "Careful," Matt said, as he walked up behind me. He looked over my shoulder and saw the red glint of the item. Not sure why this one was not red tagged on the list. "Step out, please. I'm taking this to the secure storage room. I need you to move all the other boxes to cold storage and hurry. I don't have anyone else to spare for help at the moment, so just go as fast as you can." I nodded quickly and stepped aside, watching as Matt carefully maneuvered the red labeled container onto a specialized cart. His movements were precise, almost reverent, as he secured it with straps I hadn't seen used on any other shipment. The container emitted a soft humming noise that made my teeth ache. "Don't fall behind," Matt called over his shoulder as he wheeled the mysterious box away. "And remember, no unnecessary contact." I returned to my task, moving the remaining containers to cold storage with mechanical efficiency. Each one seemed to react differently to being handled. One vibrates intensely when passing certain areas of the warehouse. Another grew noticeably heavier near the loading bay doors, as if reluctant to be stored away. I tried to focus solely on the physical labor, to shut down the part of my brain screaming that none of this was normal. The cold storage area was a maze of shelving units filled with identical black containers. The temperature was brutal, my breath clouding instantly in the frigid air. My fingers grew numb as I positioned each new arrival in its designated spot, guided only by the blinking scanner in my hand. I noticed that some of the older containers had frost patterns forming on their surfaces, not random crystallization, but intricate, almost deliberate designs. Just as I finished securing the last container, the lights in cold storage flickered. Once, twice, then plunged into darkness for a full 3 seconds before sputtering back to life. I stood there shivering and regretted not bringing a coat or something warm. Fortunately, I was finished. Back on the main floor, I discovered that 2 more trucks had arrived while I'd been occupied in the cold storage area. My heart sank at the sight of the endless freight waiting to be processed. Without the forklift, I'd have to move everything by hand. Matt was nowhere to be found, likely still dealing with that mysterious red-tagged container. I grabbed another dolly and set to work, my muscles already protesting from the strain of moving the first batch of containers. These new shipments weren't the black boxes, but were still unnervingly heavy, crates of textile equipment according to their manifests, though they weighed far more than any sewing machine I'd ever encountered. I tried to maintain a rhythm as I wheeled crate after crate to their designated areas. The warehouse seemed to stretch endlessly before me, distances expanding impossibly between loading dock and staging areas. My shirt clung to my back with sweat despite the building's chill. After I finished with the trucks, another arrived with dozens of smaller packages needing scanning and sorting. Fatigue made me clumsy, and I fumbled with the scanner, dropping it twice and cracking the casing on the second fall. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. I'd been working non-stop for hours, yet had barely made a dent in the night's shipments. The manifest on my tablet showed 3 more trucks scheduled before dawn. I felt a spike of panic rise in my chest. There was simply no way I could finish all this alone. I worked non-stop, skipping whatever time I would have taken for a break. I was tired, hungry, and exhausted, and no one else was around to help. I lost track of time, and to my horror, I heard the 5 a.m. alarm go off. I dropped a box I was carrying and it crashed to the floor. I was scared to look down at it, but when I did, I saw the box had not opened. I bolted to the exit just in time, feeling the adrenaline surging through my veins as I burst out, immediately catching the anxious stares of a few co-workers from other sections of the warehouse. Their eyes were wide with concern, clearly worried about the chaos erupting behind me. As I hurried further away, I desperately tried to block out the ominous noises that began to echo, a sinister sound building in the distance. Suddenly, a whisper sliced through the tension. urgently vying for my attention. "Hey you, did you see Mike? From Section 4? He was supposed to be right behind me." I shook my head and watched as the blood drained from the man's face. I was about to offer some reassurance when the air was pierced by an intensifying buzzing and screeching sound, a cacophony that made my skin crawl. The others turned away, unwilling to face the impending horror. But the man who had questioned me stood frozen, fear etched on his features. The terrifying sounds from yesterday crescendoed once more, each note now carrying the unmistakable clarity of a person's voice, a desperate cry for help. A scream tore through the air, sharp and chilling, and then everything plunged into an eerie, suffocating silence. I turned away, closing my eyes, and tried to steady my thoughts as I waited. Eventually, someone announced we had just 1 minute before maintenance time ended. We lined up to return to our stations, and I caught sight of the man who had asked about his co-worker, shuffling despondently behind me. His face was a mask of hopelessness and despair. We all had a sense that something terrible had happened to his friend, but no one knew what, and no one dared to voice it. I returned to my station, so far behind in my remaining work that I felt hopeless. I toiled on mechanically, my mind a tumult of uncertainty and dread. My shift came and went, stretching nearly to 12 hours, finally ending after 9 a.m. Despite the exhaustion, I couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief over my circumstances. I staggered back to my car and drove home. My second day was over, and I found myself wishing I could just ignore the reality of my situation. I went to sleep and tried to forget it all, for the small portion of the day I had left, before I had to go back for my third day. Predictably, I had only gotten a few meager hours of sleep. Even then, my dreams were haunted by the events of the previous shift. They kept replaying in my mind, the strange containers, the horrifying sounds during maintenance, and most disturbing of all, the missing worker no one would acknowledge. As I drove to work, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. I forced myself to relax, to breathe. Whatever was happening at PT, shipping, I needed to keep my head if I was going to survive it long enough to find a way out. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived, just like before. I recognized Jean's beat-up sedan and felt a wave of relief. At least I wouldn't be alone tonight. Inside, the warehouse hummed with its usual eerie quiet. I found Jean at her station, methodically checking manifests on her tablet. "You look like shit," she greeted me without looking up. "Didn't sleep much," I admitted, dropping my voice. "Not after what happened yesterday." Jean's fingers paused over the screen. "What happened yesterday?" "Someone didn't make it out during maintenance," I whispered, stepping closer. I heard him scream. Everyone heard it, but no one said anything afterward. They just pretended it didn't happen. Jean's expression didn't change, but her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. She glanced at the security camera in the corner before returning to her tablet. "Accidents happen in warehouses," she said flatly. "People get careless, don't follow protocol." "That wasn't an accident," I hissed. "Whatever happens during maintenance killed someone." Jean slammed her tablet down and fixed me with a cold stare. "Keep your voice down. You want to be next?" The harshness of her words stopped me cold. We stood in tense silence until Jean sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "You're not wrong, but talking about it won't help you, won't help anyone. Just do your job and stay alive." "How can you be so calm about this?" I demanded. "People are dying here, Jean. I know you are careful. But what happens if you make a mistake? It could be you next with one slip up. You think I don't know that? Her voice cracked slightly, the first real emotion I'd seen from her. I've been here 7 years. I've seen things that... She stopped herself, composing her features back into their usual mask of indifference. We don't have time for more of this tonight. We have a lot of shipments coming in. Get your head in the game or get out and see how far you can get by running away. I thought you were smarter than this. Don't prove me wrong. Now come on, first truck's here. She turned around and walked toward the reception. I followed her, my mind racing with more questions. At first, I did not want to let it go. I wanted to demand real answers about what was happening. But as I followed her, I started to relent and knew she was right. I could not do anything about what happened right now. I needed to keep my head down and focus on the immediate task if I wanted to make it through another night. The first truck backed slowly into the bay. Jean punched in the access code and stepped back as the doors swung open. This time, instead of the mysterious black containers, the truck held rows of large wooden crates. Regular shipment, Jean murmured, almost sounding relieved. Grab the scanner and let's get started. We worked in silence for nearly an hour, moving crate after crate to the appropriate staging areas. Fortunately, the forklift was working again, and it helped make the process go a lot faster. I started to relax slightly, falling into the rhythm of scan, lift, move, repeat. So, I ventured cautiously as we took a brief pause between trucks. How did you end up working here? 7 years is a long time. Jean gave me a sidelong glance, seeming to weigh whether answering was worth the risk. Finally, she sighed. I need the money, she said simply. My mother was sick, cancer. The treatments weren't covered by her insurance. PT paid better than anywhere else, and they didn't ask questions about my background. She adjusted her gloves, a little ritual I'd noticed she had when thinking about something. By the time she died, I was in too deep. Couldn't just walk away, like you know by now. I'm sorry about your mother, I said quietly. Jean nodded once, acknowledging my sympathy without inviting further discussion. Second truck's due in 5 minutes. I need to check the manifests. As she walked away, I noticed a slight limp in her gait that hadn't been there before. The physical toll of this job was evident, but I wondered about the mental toll as well. How many maintenance sessions had Jean witnessed? How many co-workers had she seen disappear? The intercom crackled to life, startling me from my thoughts. Jean, report to my office immediately. Matt's voice sounded strained, almost nervous. Jean froze mid-step, her shoulders tensing visibly. Without a word, she changed direction and headed toward the administrative section of the warehouse. The look she gave me as she passed was impossible to interpret. Perhaps a warning, perhaps resignation. Left alone, I continued processing the shipment, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in my gut. 20 minutes passed with no sign of Jean. The second truck arrived, and I found myself facing it alone. Remembering the protocol Jean had demonstrated, I punched in the code, stepped back, and watched as the doors swung open. The air that was released when the doors opened felt oddly hot and musty. Normally, they were frigid inside. There was a terrible clattering sound from a fan that may have been the cooling unit. I was no HVAC specialist, but it sounded broken. Inside, there were only 2 large black containers. I scanned them and checked the temperatures, and was disturbed when I saw that both were reading much warmer than normal. Instead of the usual negative numbers for the cold storage items, they displayed +9 degrees and +12 degrees, respectively. far warmer than they should be. Something was wrong. I hesitated, remembering Jean's warning about containers that weren't operating correctly. I wondered if I should call Matt, but I remembered he was already with Jean, and something about their meeting made me uneasy. I decided to follow protocol and move the containers to their designated area, hoping once they got inside it would not be an issue anymore. As I maneuvered the first container onto the dolly, a sharp, acrid smell hit me, chemical and organic at once, like formaldehyde mixed with rotting meat. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, but it did little to block the stench. The container seemed lighter than usual, almost buoyant on the dolly. Halfway to the staging area, the container began to leak. It started as a thin trickle from one corner, a viscous amber fluid that splattered onto the concrete floor with a hiss. Each droplet seemed to vibrate upon impact, spreading outward in perfect concentric circles. The smell intensified, burning my nostrils and making my eyes water. I froze, uncertain what to do. The rules were clear: never open anything. Don't even touch the containers more than necessary. But something was clearly wrong, and no one else was around to help. The leaking intensified, the amber fluid now streaming from multiple seams in the container. Where it pooled on the floor, the concrete began to discolor. As I watched the containers leak onto the floor in confused concern, something even worse happened. To my horror, one of the containers emitted a grotesque bubbling and gurgling noise, followed by a distinct thud against its interior. The sound jolted through me. I stared in disbelief until the relentless banging persisted. Something was trapped inside, desperately clawing to escape. I was too shocked to move, to do anything other than listen to the panicked thrashing inside and watch the hideous container convulse and writhe with the efforts of whatever was inside. All the while, more of the putrid liquid splashed onto the warehouse floor. My terrified stupor broke, and I knew I had to do something. At that moment, I was driven by a desperate desire to throw the lid off to try and see whatever, or worse, whoever was in there trying to get out. Then I remembered the cameras and the ever-present danger of what happened to anyone who broke the rules. After an agonized moment, the thrashing in the container had abated somewhat, and to my shame I had made my choice. I left the container on the floor. Remembering the intercom boxes around the warehouse, I searched nearby for the closest one and called for help. "Matt and Jean, we've got a serious situation in Bay B." My voice cracked with panic as I yelled into the intercom. No response came. I pressed the button again, harder this time, as if that would somehow force them to answer. "Matt, Jean, 2 containers are leaking and one of them has something moving inside. I need help now." Only static answered me. The thrashing inside the container had quieted to an occasional thud, but the amber fluid continued to pool, spreading across the concrete in a widening circle. The air felt thick with the chemical stench, making each breath a struggle. Suddenly, a new sound emerged from the second container, a high-pitched keening that oscillated between mechanical whine and human wail. The temperature display flickered wildly, jumping between numbers before settling on error in blinking red letters. "Screw this," I muttered, turning to run toward Matt's office. I made it 3 steps before the overhead lights suddenly dimmed, then brightened to an intense glare that cast harsh shadows across the warehouse floor. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of Matt's voice, a strange, modulated tone emerged. "Containment breach detected in Sector 3. Containment protocols initiated." A siren began to wail, different from the 5 a.m. alarm, more urgent. Red emergency lights began to flash throughout the warehouse, painting the dark corners with a hellish glow. Heavy footsteps pounded across the warehouse floor. Matt appeared, flanked by two men I'd never seen before. They wore hazmat suits, their faces obscured behind thick plexiglass visors. Matt's expression was thunderous, a vein pulsing in his temple as he surveyed the scene. "Get back," he shouted at me, gesturing wildly. "Breach, get to decontamination now." The two suited men rushed forward with what looked like industrial fire extinguishers, but instead of foam or water, they sprayed a crystalline white substance over the leaking containers and spreading fluid. The chemical reaction was immediate. The amber liquid hardened, turning to a brittle glass-like substance that cracked and splintered. "I tried to call," I began, but Matt cut me off with a savage gesture. "Shut up and move," he snarled, grabbing my arm and dragging me away from the scene. I was able to glimpse behind me as we went back to the office and saw the hazmat men bathing the container in what looked like some type of liquid nitrogen shower. I heard one of them mumble something about putting them back on ice. And then we were back down the hall and away from the mess. I explained to Matt that I thought the truck's cooling unit was broken and somehow the containers warmed up. I knew better than to ask him what the hell that liquid was, or about what I heard and what I saw. He listened to my report and nodded grimly. I wasn't sure what to do, I added, trying to keep my voice steady. I followed protocol as best I could. Matt studied me for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable in the harsh office lighting. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before. "You did better than most would have," he admitted grudgingly. "At least you didn't try to open them." A chill ran down my spine at his words. Had he somehow known I had considered it? Matt's jaw shifted into something akin to a smile. "Temperature control failure. Happens sometimes during transport." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small metal flask. Taking a deep swig, he offered it to me. "Drink. It'll help with the exposure." I hesitated, but the burning in my throat from the chemical fumes made the offer tempting. I took the flask and gulped down a mouthful of what turned out to be surprisingly smooth whiskey. "Thanks," I said, handing it back. Matt studied me again, something calculating in his gaze. "You did well. Take a break and have a breather outside. We still need to sanitize Bay B. You can get back to it when you return." I was thankful to get the impromptu break to clear my head from the things I'd just witnessed. I stepped outside just as Jean was returning. She nodded briefly at me in passing and moved on before I could try and speak with her. I figured she must have been busy, but I wanted to tell her about what I saw. I went outside and got in my car, trying to decompress. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The thrashing inside that container, the amber fluid eating through concrete, none of it could be explained by any legitimate shipping operation. The tap on my window nearly made me jump out of my skin. A woman stood beside my car, her face partially obscured by the hood of a dark jacket. When I didn't immediately respond, she tapped again, harder this time, her knuckles rapping impatiently against the glass. I lowered the window a few inches, caution overriding courtesy. "Can I help you?" In one fluid motion, she pulled a gun from her pocket and aimed it directly at my face. "Don't scream. Don't move." Her voice was steady, despite the slight tremor in her hand. "Get out of the car. You're going to help me get in there and find my brother." The gun trembled slightly in her hand near a very well-detailed dragon tattoo that circled her wrist. Her eyes remained fixed and determined. She couldn't have been more than 30, with dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept in days. "Listen," I said, raising my hand slowly. I just started working here. I don't know anything about—" "Shut up," she hissed. "Mike worked here for 3 months. Yesterday, he didn't come home. His car's still even in the lot, but no one's seen him." Her voice cracked slightly. "The police said he has not been gone long enough to declare missing. That sometimes people just leave. But I know my brother. He wouldn't just disappear. He never told me the specifics, but he was terrified of this place. I don't know why he kept coming here for work, but I knew if he did not come home, that something would have happened here." Mike. The name hit me like a physical blow. The missing worker from yesterday's maintenance period, the one who didn't make it out in time. "You need to leave," I whispered urgently. "This place isn't safe. If they catch you here—" "I don't care," she interrupted, pressing the gun closer. 3 months ago, Mike started acting strange, paranoid. He wouldn't talk about his job, but he was terrified of something. Then yesterday, nothing. His roommate said he went to work and never came back. A tear slid down her cheek. "Now get out of the car." My mind raced. If I helped her, I'd be breaking a rule. If I refused, she might shoot me. And if she went in there alone, she'd almost certainly disappear. I had no clue what to do. But for the time being, I obliged and stepped out of my car. "Please, you have to understand," I whispered, eyeing the gun nervously. "Whatever happened to your brother, I'm sorry, but going in there is suicide. The things I've seen in just 2 days." "I don't need your sympathy," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "I need answers, and you're going to help me get them." My mind raced through possibilities. We were in the parking lot, presumably visible on security cameras. How long before someone noticed? Before Matt sent someone to check on me? "What's your name?" I asked, trying to buy time. "Lisa," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Mike Donovan is my brother." "Lisa, listen to me. There's something wrong with this place. It's not safe." I trailed off, realizing how insane it would sound to describe what I'd witnessed. "I don't care. If he is still in there, I am going to get him. You are going to get me in there." Lisa's voice cracked with desperation. She pressed the gun to my back and I started walking back to the main door. I had no idea what her plan was, but I had to think of something to save both of us. I got back to the door and looked at Lisa and she nodded. I pressed the button on the door, and as it opened, I saw Jean. She was just stepping outside, a freshly lit cigarette in her lips, as she was walking out at the same time. Her eyes flicked from me to Lisa, then zeroed in on the gun with clinical detachment. "Put that down before you get yourself killed," Jean said, her voice flat and emotionless. Lisa's hand trembled, the gun now wavering between Jean and me. "Stay back. I just want to find my brother, Mike Donovan. He worked here and now he's gone." Jean's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe even a hint of pity. She took a single step forward. "I knew Mike. He was a good guy." Lisa's face crumpled. "What do you mean, was?" Jean gazed at Lisa with a contradictory mixture of compassion and indifference. "Mike violated protocol during maintenance yesterday. There was an incident." "Bullshit." Lisa's voice rose dangerously. "What does that even mean? Where is he? What aren't you telling me?" She pointed the gun straight at Jean, who stood there looking indifferent to the threat. "You're going to take me inside, and we are going to find him." Jean slowly raised her hands, as if finally acknowledging the gun pointed at her, and responded emotionlessly. "This way." I followed both of them back into the warehouse, nervously looking around to see if anyone was there to help. I knew we were in danger, but I felt conflicted. This woman was just looking for her brother. It sounded like she had some idea of the danger he was in. I wanted her to have answers and closure, but I knew what it meant to break protocol and try and help. If anything, in order to save my own skin, the rules dictated I had to try and detain her for trespassing. I followed along in a conflicted daze. Distracted as I was, I barely registered the flashing light behind us near the fallen tablet that Jean had left. We walked along for a while, and everything was strangely quiet. We arrived at a side entrance near the storage rooms. We stopped moving, and Lisa looked nervous and asked, "What is this? Why are we stopping?" Jean turned around and flatly stated, "To say I am sorry about this for you and for Mike." I was confused, and Lisa looked concerned. A deafening crash erupted behind us as the warehouse door flew open with violent force. Before I could even turn around, a mountain of a man charged through, moving with terrifying speed for someone his size. In one fluid motion, he slammed into Lisa, knocking her forward with such force that the gun clattered across the concrete floor. "Target down," the man announced in a cold, methodical voice. Lisa struggled beneath his massive frame, gasping for air as he twisted her arm behind her back with practiced efficiency. I stood frozen, shocked by the sudden ambush. I took a step back and almost put my own hands up. The large man looked up at Jean and then at me and growled out a brief introduction. "Charles Stanton, Security Chief. I see the firearms, so I presume you were taken by force and have not failed to detain the target yourselves." His voice had a strange air of accusation, like it was our fault for not arresting the woman who had us at gunpoint and making him do his job. Stanton suddenly yanked Lisa to her feet. His face was a mask of professional detachment, but his eyes, there was something predatory in them that made my blood run cold. "Civilian trespasser," Jean explained, brushing dust from her uniform. "Armed as you saw, took us hostage." Stanton nodded his head and looked at me. "Since the trespasser was apprehended, you are free to leave now. Considering the circumstance, I will speak with Matt and authorize you to take the rest of the night off. Go home and get some rest. Leave this to us." I looked at Lisa, who had been handcuffed, and then at Jean, who was grimly watching as Stanton was logging something on his phone. I know she had just held me up at gunpoint, but something felt wrong about leaving her with this Stanton guy. I asked what would happen with her. "Local authorities have been contacted," Stanton replied, his voice unnervingly calm. "They'll deal with the trespasser appropriately." Something in his tone didn't match his words. It did not feel like it was standard procedure for handling a trespasser. He was not even making a call, and why did he want me to leave all of a sudden? It was just this mountain of a man with dead eyes claiming authorities had been contacted. "I just want to know what happened to my brother," Lisa shouted, struggling against her restraints. "Please, Mike, are you here?" Stanton's massive hand clamped over her mouth, silencing her instantly. "That's enough," he growled, all pretense of professionalism vanishing. I took a hesitant step forward. Maybe I should stay. I was involved, so I should probably give a statement or something. Jar shot me a warning look, almost imperceptible but unmistakable in its intensity. Her eyes said everything her mouth couldn't. "Get out. Now, your statement can wait until tomorrow," Stanton said, his attention returning to me. "Go home. That's an order." I looked at Lisa one last time. Tears streamed down her face, her eyes wide with terror and pleading. I wanted to help her, But what could I do? If I stayed, I'd likely disappear too. Okay, I said finally, backing away. I'll see you tomorrow, Jean. Jean nodded grimly at me and then turned back to Stanton and the captive Lisa. I reluctantly left the warehouse on unsteady legs, my mind reeling with conflicted emotions. The sound of Lisa's desperate cries echoed in my ears as I stumbled to my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, I sat motionless, staring at the warehouse's blank exterior. What was happening there right now? What would happen to me if I'd stayed? I felt sick, guilty, and helpless. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, glancing repeatedly in my rearview mirror at the building receding behind me. No police cars approached. No sirens wailed in the distance. Whatever Stanton meant by authorities, it clearly wasn't the local police department. Back home, I felt a creeping sense of paranoia. I double-locked the door behind me and drew all the blinds. I thought I could ignore everything and press on, but more and more happened every day. I did not know how much more I could take, and my heart sank when I realized I had another day of that madness in store for me tomorrow.